Story 1. Sober, a little more than 2 days. With speed, 5 days, by far my longest and my first and only introduction to the shadow people I had always assumed were a made-up rumor. Story 2. 36 hours without sleep and I was miserable. The worst part is trying to actually go to bed after being awake that long. Story 3. 43 hours of labor followed by a cesarean section. Then I was up about every 2 hours for the next few weeks. The baby is 3 months old now, and my longest sleep duration is 6 hours. This is pretty normal for childbirth. Story 4. I was awake for 6 days on crystal meth, driving back to Los Angeles from Sacramento. I was exhausted by then. Story 5. 3 days. Friday night game after school and band practice. I didn't get home until 3 a.m. Had to be back at 5 a.m. for a competition, which I did not get home from until 2 a.m. Then I had church at 10 a.m., and the choir I was singing in was performing one of my favorite songs. I was scared if I fell asleep, I would miss it. Then my parents decided I needed to clean the house. I might be off a little on the time, but I remember sleeping through school on Monday. The teacher was cool about it and let me rest in her class most of the day. Story 6. Went to a science fiction convention once and stayed up more than 64 hours. I am glad my car knew the way home because I do not remember driving. Story 7. About 60 hours, I was tiring myself out to travel on a 34-hour trip with layovers, and somehow I was so tired I couldn't sleep. I landed at my destination at 5 a.m., got home to my second residence, and still couldn't sleep. I ended up going out to get myself together and came home around 5 p.m., eventually sleeping for 21 hours. I think it was longer, but everything felt groggy. Another intense experience was when I worked consecutive gig jobs in event production, working 27 hours straight between 2 jobs. I completed a 16-hour shift at a hockey tournament, then went across the street to set up for a music festival. That shift ended at 4:30 a.m. I went back across the street to the hockey venue to rest, as my next shift was starting in 5 hours. However, there was a major spill of a pallet of beer, so I immediately returned to work. I was sent home after dropping a wine bottle due to exhaustion. I will never do that again. Story 8. 53 hours, teenager energy, and a lot of chain smoking playing RuneScape. I more or less passed out and slept for about 14 hours afterwards. Similar logic applies on one double experience weekend, from midday Friday to midday Monday, on RuneScape, which I booked off work in my early 20s. In the 72 hours, I managed approximately 58 hours of playtime. Story 9. About 56 hours. Traveling from a Pacific island to Northern Europe. I couldn't sleep on the plane or in airports. Took me about a week to recover. Story 10. About 72 hours, but often I go through spells of bad restless legs and arms syndrome that my medications do not help, and I will not sleep more than 2 hours a night for a week or so. It is the only time I ever contemplate ending it all. It is that miserable. Story 11. 72 hours of playing League of Legends almost non-stop with 2 friends. There might have been some stimulants involved. That was not a very good period of time. Story 12. 38 hours awake. Slept for 4 hours, then was back up for another 18-hour shift. I could do it. I didn't feel much, just tired rather than sleepy. Now, if I am awake for more than 18 hours, I am out of commission for 2 days. Story 13. Roughly 48 straight hours finishing my final term paper for my last college class. I was pretty exhausted by the time I got back to my apartment. Story 14. I think the longest I have gone is about 40 hours. I was traveling to Europe and could not sleep on planes most of the time. I landed in the morning and did not want to disrupt my sleep schedule by sleeping during the day. Story 15. 28. I don't know how people can make it past 24. On hour 27, I was fried. I couldn't think straight. It was such an awful feeling. Story 16. 4 days. I was in art school and overwhelmed with my projects and assignments. I was either in class working on my projects or showering. I ate while working or in class. I slept for 18 hours when it was done. Caffeine has not kept me awake since. Story 17. 3 days. I was studying for a final exam. Day 1 was fine. Day 2 was less fine. On day 3, I became paranoid and thought the shadows were following me and I was being watched. When I finally tried to go to sleep, I could not. Story 18. About 30 hours. When I stay awake long enough, everything looks and feels strange. Like a dream, but it is not. Story 19. After almost 3 days, when I finally slept, I had a dream that I barely remember, but I know it was very long. I only slept for about 3 hours. Anyway, I was grateful to finally fall asleep. Story 20. 5 days straight of drug binging with people I am glad I do not know anymore, and I felt like I was dying by the end. My God, it is amazing to think how things have changed since then. Story 21. I think I have gone 3 days straight, but I have gone weeks with no more than 2 to 3 hours of sleep every other day during manic episodes. Story 22. I work on a very specialized area of a foreign exchange and futures trade desk. It was a significant issue when COVID-19 first began. After about 2 weeks of absolute chaos, Friday arrived, and I went to bed at 7 p.m. and woke up Sunday at 9 a.m. Sleeping through an entire day is quite unusual. Edit. I misunderstood the prompt. I went 5 days without sleeping because I was in the hospital and needed to be sleep deprived. I almost fell asleep while walking on day 3. Story 23. Almost 2 days straight. I was flying to the United States and needed to be up at 3 a.m. to get to the airport. So I decided to stay awake and sleep on the flight. That backfired because I did not sleep a wink. When I eventually slept, I was out for 16 hours straight. Story 24. 4 days. Undiagnosed bipolar disorder plus post-traumatic stress disorder flashbacks. Every time I closed my eyes, I had another flashback. The longer I went without sleep, the worse it got. I ended up being admitted to the hospital on day 3. Once I made it to day 4, they gave me medication for it. I lost my mind entirely. Story 25. 38 hours. I had an event that required me to be awake for 24 hours, in addition to the setup and teardown afterward. It was brutal. Story 26. 9 days on amphetamine felt like I was on the verge of dying at the end. I would not recommend it to anyone. I had a rough time back then, and I am sober now. Life does get better. Story 27. My friend tried staying up for a week and played video games at night, but on day 3, his mother caught him. Story 28. Don't think I have gone more than 24 hours. I get so tired I end up getting an hour or 2 of sleep somewhere. This is not a habit I like to have. In college, Hell Week leading up to finals was filled with sleepless nights, but I still managed to catch a couple of hours of sleep here and there. Story 29. In my first semester of engineering college, I was awake for 5 days and 4 nights straight. I had not studied the whole semester, did not even know the syllabus, and had completed 0 assignments. I did all the assignments during those nights while spending the full day in college. During all that, I felt normal with a bit of a heavy head, nothing else. My hostel mates made me into a legend for that, though. I slept for 18 hours straight that weekend. Story 30. While in active addiction about 3 days multiple times, it is a horrible experience. Very scary seeing and hearing things that are not there. Story 31. I have been awake for about 36 hours due to traveling. I become very difficult for those around me when I am tired, so I try to avoid that at all costs. Story 32. I was awake for about 4 days during a manic episode. I started hallucinating around day 3. When I finally slept, I slept for about 2 days. I did not eat or drink anything during that time. I became very dehydrated and sick because of the dehydration. My parents had me admitted later that week when I tried to harm myself. Bipolar disorder is very difficult. Story 33. 2 20-hour plane rides with a 19-hour layover between. When we arrived at the family home, I literally closed my eyes for 1 second after falling on the bed and woke up exactly 12 hours later. Story 34. About 32 hours during my first game jam. By that point, I felt too tired to sleep, and it took me an hour and a half to finally fall asleep. Story 35. I hope you all have a good night's sleep every day. I just asked this because I wasn't able to sleep, but I didn't know a lot of people were far worse. Praying that you all have good nights and dreams every day. Story 36. 110 hours. Hallucinations of small animals scurrying along the walls start around 60 hours. Eventually, it hurts to close your eyes. I did this twice in a 4-week period. Story 37. I ran on less than 4 hours of sleep per day for about 3 weeks while doing hurricane response when I was in the Coast Guard. I pulled into port at the end and got completely intoxicated, prevented a man from getting hit by a car, talked another one out of suicide, then slept for 16 hours. Definitely one of the most intense periods of my life. Story 38. A bit over 50 hours. I think I might have had some periods of microsleep while driving, as I do not remember anything at all about the drive. Do you experience hallucinations too, or answer questions with responses that have nothing to do with the question? Story 39. 48 hours for me. I had to force myself to sleep when I started getting heart palpitations. Like another user said, it is hard to fall asleep when your body is panicking. Story 40. 36 hours awake and strangely getting up in the morning, if we can still call it that. Felt better than getting 8 hours of sleep. Story 41. 43 hours. I was driving to go camping when the trees on the side of the road began to take human shapes. The smudge on the glass looked like a semi-truck in the middle of the road. Story 42. 3 days. I was in college. I have severe exam anxiety. Big accounting exam. I could not sleep for 3 days straight and spent all that time studying. To this day, I do not know how I did it. But the moment I put my pencil down was when I felt equal parts relief and exhaustion. I went home and slept until the next day. My entire body just crashed. Story 43. 6 straight days and nights with absolutely zero sleep and no medication. My body wanted to sleep, but coronavirus disease would not allow it. Story 44. After 6 days, I started hallucinating and seeing sounds. The air around me would wave like a flag. I was too scared to drive because my reaction time was terrible. Friends would come to say hi, and it would take me 15 to 20 seconds to realize they were there. By day 4, I was not really tired, just miserable, and everything felt uncomfortable. I have severe post-traumatic stress disorder and insomnia, so it has not been a fun experience. I have probably had at least 1 sleepless night per week since the start of the pandemic. Story 45. Somewhere around 48 hours. I realized I had been awake for 36 hours before I had to start doing a bunch of things. When I finished those tasks, I lay down for another 2 hours struggling to sleep. I slept for 6 hours and felt great. Story 46. 3.5 days, give or take. No drugs or anything. I just didn't feel like going to sleep. By the end of it, I felt very light, as if I was moving underwater, slightly drunk, and everything was just sort of fuzzy. Story 47. Around 54 hours. After about 24 hours, too tired to enjoy or focus on anything that might pass the time, so just aimlessly wandering around like a zombie. Not in pain or extreme discomfort, just feeling generally unwell and, for lack of a better word, gray. On the plus side, when I was finally able to get in bed knowing that I did not need to set an alarm clock, just lying there was one of the nicest feelings I can remember. Story 48. Reception at Army Basic Training lasted about 48 hours. I was so tired I hallucinated that the blue book they gave me was a phone, which they took. I started scrolling, and I vividly remember the words and pictures moving when I did. Story 49. I stayed awake for a little over 2 days to prove I did not need sleep to function. It was a foolish dare with my cousins when I was a child. I won, but at what cost? Story 50. 3 nights after which I started hallucinating doors that would appear in front of me. I knew they were not real, but I could see them as if they were right there. Story 51. 68 hours in architecture school. I was hallucinating little bugs running around the edges of my vision. I finally went to bed and had a hard time falling asleep. Once I did, I think I slept for 16 hours. Story 52. 42 to 43 hours due to solo travel. Red-eye flight after a normal 5 a.m. start. then a diverted flight to a closed airport, and another delayed flight to the original destination. Adrenaline kicked in and finally crashed after dinner. Story 53. I think it was 56 hours, something between 50 and 60. By the end of the night, my head felt like it was being compressed but also felt light, and I thought I was floating. Story 54. At university, I had 3 essays due on the same day. Instead of working on them over several weeks, I stayed up 3 nights in a row. I got up at 8 o'clock on Tuesday, went to university for the day, then stayed in the library until midnight. I returned to my flat to work on them, then went back to the library at 7 o'clock in the morning to tweak and format them. I repeated this process for 2 more days. On Friday, I technically had until 4 o'clock in the afternoon to submit them, but I was traveling home for a few days. Therefore, I had to complete and submit everything by 9 o'clock in the morning, and I needed to pack before leaving. By this point, my blood felt like it had been replaced with coffee, and I was hallucinating kittens everywhere. As soon as I got on the bus home, I passed out and almost missed my stop but managed to get off. Once home, I slept for 14 hours. Somehow, I passed all the essays. Story 55. 10 days. I did it because I wanted to break the world record for the longest time without sleep, only to find out afterward that the Guinness World Records no longer tracks that record. Story 56. From about 12 p.m. Friday to midnight on Sunday, working 36 hours during these days, including 8 hours on Friday and 14 hours on both Saturday and Sunday. Can you guess the industry? I am going to do it this weekend as well. Story 57. Around 36 hours. I was running a 24-hour marathon and obviously did not sleep much before it because of adrenaline. After 20 hours of running, visual hallucinations started to occur, and by the end, I had mild auditory hallucinations as well, but nothing too scary. Story 58. I'm not completely sure, to be honest. I know I made it past 90 hours because I remember realizing that I was about to hit 4 days. I might have made it as far as 100 hours. I have actually reached the same amount of time twice in my life, and I am not sure which one was longer. The first time was my senior year of college. I had such an intense workload in the last week that I was taking Adderall frequently. I know I used an entire month's supply in 4 days. I had planned to make it to 5 days, but eventually even the Adderall had no effect. Another time was at a music festival which also involved drugs. I don't know exactly what I took and when, but I know ecstasy, cocaine, methamphetamine, and lysergic acid diethylamide were all involved. Both times I experienced prolonged effects afterward, and I am not sure if I ever fully recovered. I strongly urge everyone not to exceed 2 days. Things get really strange afterward. Story 59. 4 days sober, 5 days on amphetamines. Europe, so not methamphetamine. I definitely saw shadow people both times. During that period of my life, it was normal for me to go 24 to 48 hours without sleeping, either from insomnia or drug use. Story 60. My freshman year of college, I stayed up for 4 days straight during finals week. I spent the whole semester slacking off and thought I would do all my studying that last week while also taking my exams. By the final day, I felt like I was walking through a dream. I was hyper-aware of my senses, and my muscles all felt very weak. I ended up sleeping for almost 2 days straight afterward. Would not recommend. Story 61. I don't know how people stay awake for long periods. I once stayed awake for about 30 hours, from noon until 6 p.m. the following day. My vision was completely blurred and splotchy, and I felt like I was hallucinating. Story 62. Close to 70, I think, 3-day final history paper writing marathon just to see if I could do a semester's worth of work in less than a week. I will never do that again. Story 63. I should probably try that out sometime without pushing myself too hard, because you just made me curious. Story 64. Around a year ago, I decided to go an entire night without sleeping. It was the first and last time I did so. I strongly advise against it. It was not a wise decision in retrospect. While I was doing it, it was not awful, but as time passed, I became very exhausted and extremely tired. I fell asleep for about 2 hours in the evening and lost track of time, thinking it was 12 hours different than it actually was. It was around 6 in the evening, and I thought it was 6 in the morning. I will never do that again. Story 65. 9 days. A friend dropped me off at the emergency room, and they gave me medication that knocked me out for about 4 to 5 hours. Neurodivergence, thou art a cruel mistress. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.